Hi everyone, long time no see. So we're back here to talk about health security, dive a little bit deeper into how Europe is prepared or is preparing for the multiple health threats that we also just heard about from Commissioner Labib. So great segue into this panel. Joining me here, we have Wolfgang Philipp, Chief Scientific Officer at DG HERA, Birgit Lau, Director General of the Estonian Health Board, Simon Göller, Chief Transformation and Growth Officer at Sandoz, and Ole Johan Backe, President of the Standing Committee of European Doctors. So, round of applause, please. Thank you. Okay, so we just heard from Commissioner Labib about all the various health threats that Europe is preparing for: CBRN, climate change and the microbial resistance, growing infectious diseases, and how the Commission and HERA are working on really helping Europe prepare from the moment of surveillance and research development all the way to distribution. So I would like to start with you, Wolfgang. HERA was born, out of a reaction to a crisis, obviously, during the COVID-19 pandemic, but now it is working on helping us be prepared for the next one so that we're better positioned whenever something were to happen again. And Commissioner, they say it's a matter of when, not if. So how has HERA identified what the biggest gaps are in us getting us to a point where we feel confidently prepared, or where are our biggest vulnerabilities?
I think Commissioner mentioned already a lot of things that I wanted to say.
But
at the end of the day, perhaps I can enlighten a couple of things with some more details. I would say in terms of preparedness, it was a big step forward the past 4 years. HERA was born basically out of a move of a big political will by a commission president, by the College of Commissioners, saying we need something for better preparedness, to have access to medical countermeasures. We did not have masks at the beginning, not to talk about the other things. No? So we had that political support, and we also had the institutional support to set it up in 1 year. And that was something that could be done only with a large degree of freedom. Now we are operating since 4 years. We have been investing more than $1 billion in research and development of medical countermeasures. That is all the different classes, vaccines, drugs, smart materials, etc., etc. We have been investing into manufacturing capacities, reserving manufacturing capacities. We have been investing into many things that cover the whole needs of things that are essential to respond to an outbreak. The example just mentioned by the Commissioner, the situation now in Ethiopia, that particular restricted outbreak of Marburg in a specific cluster, it also shows that you need international cooperation, not just on a piece of paper as a concept, but you need to be able to fill this with life. And that is what's happening in that kind of situation. We have seen this over the past couple of years, and HERA was always involved in that kind of things, with WHO, with CEPI, with UNICEF, with Gavi, etc. And that is what we need. Investments into development of products, and then investment into the development of infrastructures and into health systems. That is the whole panoply of necessities that we still face. Are we there yet? I would say no, because we'll never be there. But at the end of the day, it's not. The biggest problem is to become complacent and not keep the drive and the spin that we need to move forward. And I will stop here because there's certainly also colleagues want to say something about that.
Okay, so not there yet, but working towards there. Birgit, yes, I will turn to you. So first I was going to ask if you can share a little bit about the work that the Estonian Health Board does. And then I wanted to ask, so countries like Estonia, so obviously face some unique challenges when it comes to both the size, but also the location in Europe in terms of bordering with Russia. So how do you prepare for multiple threats at once? What kind of support do you need also to do that?
Yeah, I would say that we have the advantage of being small and being efficient. So Health Board, in bigger picture, is the general public health institution. But aside of the public health, we also take care of the environmental health, environmental threats coming from the water, for example, of chemical supplies. And we also act as for the ECDC as an agency for managing the contagious diseases, which goes under the public health as well. But since Estonia is so small, so we don't really have the resources for the crisis management. So during the COVID time, since it was a public health crisis, we took over as a crisis manager. So now, even if we would have the war situation, we will still be the #1 crisis management authority in the field of healthcare, or if the healthcare is a dominant crisis in Estonia, then overall Estonia. So it's quite some responsibility. And what we have done, as we heard from HERA perspective, that HERA, where I also belong to the board and coming from the Copenhagen, I can assure that what has been said is true. We saw that. But it's very good to know that there is actually help coming if you are in need. But it doesn't take away the member state responsibility to actually prepare yourself. So there are no stocks hidden or money that can be given to the member state if you are not well prepared. And to be well prepared means that you have to look into yourself, assess your weaknesses, assess your strengths, assess your healthcare system, and to be really, really honest, what you can do with yourself, how much, for example, workers, doctors, nurses you can assure, where do they come extra if it's needed, and what is actually the state of play your hospitals. So if we start to look into the possible crisis scenarios, there will be a war threat, which means that we have to be open or have to be knowledgeable how to treat mass casualties. There will be numerous public health threats, even bigger, and they will come on side. So the institutions have to be very flexible, and thus the preparedness has to be very wide. And that is a very good question, how to do that from the state perspective.
Would you like to respond? Sorry, I
No, just to add, I mean, when I'm talking about HERA and get excited about these things, that's not to say that the EU is solving that problem. Obviously, everything is done in complementarity with member states. We need to know the needs. But I mean, there's certain things that you do better together. No, we have seen this also during the pandemic for the vaccines, for the joint procurement, for the drugs, diagnostics, etc. Also for recommendations for public health response, where we went united. I think that were good examples to show there are certain elements where we better work together, but it does not prevent any country or any member states of reaching a certain benchmark, the best possible level of preparedness across all of the countries that we have in Europe. Just to add.
Yeah. Simon, I'm not going to skip you, sorry, but Birgit mentioned something on nurses and doctors, which I think transitions us very well to go to all Jan really quickly, because obviously that's a big part of also being prepared, is having a resilient health system, resilient hospital systems, and prepared and trained, and also present workforce. So what role, you represent doctors and nurses, doctors all over Europe. So what kind of role does the health workforce play when it comes to health preparedness? And what kind of support does it need right now from Europe? Like, are they, what kind of situation is there?
Thank you. I'm very happy to speak on this question after the sort of multinational and national level, because there's a chain here and we need all parts of them to actually function and be prepared for the new crisis that we do not what will be, but it may be a pandemic, it may be something else. To our experience from the medical society, we see that at the EU level and also at national level in most countries, there's still very good work being done to prepare for the next crisis. But when it comes to the healthcare professionals that actually are the ones to deploy the measures that are decided and that shall be implemented, we do not see that we have kept the same capacity and also competencies that we achieved during the COVID-19 pandemic. It has been very much lost in many services. And this is not only hospitals, it's also outpatient. I mean, in communities, that's where people live, and that's where we have to deal with the health crisis. So we need a resilient health workforce. That's one thing, but we also need health security planning, and we need to invest in simulation and live play exercises that actually prepares the healthcare professionals for their role in the next health crisis. To protect the population from health crises like both epidemics and natural disasters, it requires also prevention. I mean, prevention may be vaccination, it may be data collection for disease surveillance, and also plans for the continuity of health services during crisis, and often crises that last over weeks or months or even years, like we saw lately.
Thank you. Yes, and it was also brings us back to what Commissioner Labib was also talking about when it comes to simulation, preparing and kind of practicing some of the situations so that when they happen, we're not caught unprepared. Simon, coming to you finally. So can you talk about a bit the role of industry in all of this? So in terms of what kind of role can you play in ensuring stable supply of medicines, of critical countermeasure, and also what kind of support do you need from policymakers to be able to do this?
Now look, thank you, and I think this is the exact logical sequence, right? You need to have the right policies in place, you need to have the right preparedness in place, you need to have a well-trained and available workforce in place to be able to treat patients. You also need essential medicines so that you actually have something you can treat them with. And if I reflect a little bit on how has our preparedness evolved, I think the good news is we know a lot more now than we used to. So I do think we have better information. I do think there's a better awareness of the issue. But if you ask me, are we better prepared from a fundamental ability to supply medicines and from a point of view of strategic autonomy of medical supplies in Europe, then unfortunately my answer is no. And I give you a concrete example. Antibiotics. Very basic, very fundamental. Without antibiotics, every healthcare system will grind to a halt. There's nothing you can do. We as Sandoz are the last remaining vertically integrated producer of penicillins in the entire Western world. There's no other facility in Europe. There's none in the Americas. There's none in Africa. Frankly, that scares me. And why is that? It is because at this point, we do not make a difference, by and large, with very few exceptions, where medicines come from. And that, for me, is not only a question of healthcare policy. This, for me, ultimately is a question of national security. If we want to maintain strategic autonomy in Europe, we need to be able to have the capacity and the capability to produce essential medicines in Europe. Because whatever crisis comes next, whether this is a political crisis, a pandemic, or any other crisis, without that supply, we are going to be stuck. And that's what worries me. Now, a lot of things are being done that I think are positive signals. I think the Essential Medicines Act is, in my view, an attempt to resolve at least part of the issue. My worry is that for some of the essential medicines, and especially for antibiotics, it will not go far enough. And this has something to do with ultimately a market failure. And look, to be very frank, the issue is that China has realized this. And they are very, very deliberate on this. The issue on the whole production chain of penicillins is the very first fermentation step. There are other companies doing the later steps. The very first fermentation step is where we are the only ones remaining. This is the one that China is trying to monopolize. Now, you can say they do this for economic reasons, because once you have a monopoly, guess what? Prices will go up. Or you have a view that they do this for geopolitical reasons, in which case I'm even more worried. But that's where I think we need to step up in Europe. The good news is we still have the capability. We still have a lot of the infrastructure. We need to make sure we don't lose it.
I think this also ties really well with the discussions that were happening this morning on the Critical Medicines Act and some of these ways that the Commission is trying to bring production back. But what do you think about those current initiatives, like recombinant stack, pharmaceutical legislation, biotech, things that are in the kind of legislative process right now? You mentioned they might not go far enough. What else is needed there, you think, to really stimulate this?
That's a good question. Look, I mean, again, the first one is I take it as a positive because it means that there's a general awareness of the issue. And I think that is hugely important. That we didn't have 5 years ago, we have that now. That's a positive. I think, as always, the worry is that it's either not targeted enough or it doesn't go far enough. Because I think the Essential Medicines Act is trying to resolve something very broad. And I think that's very laudable. I think on some very limited essential medicines, I think we have to go a lot deeper. And the question is, and frankly, it now depends on exactly what the Medicines Act will look like. The question is, will it have that degree of differentiation that it allows us to really have this strategic autonomy in Europe for these essential medicines? That is the question. I think it's a very tall order. Again, I think it's a positive signal. My worry is that for some things, and especially for antibiotics, it may not go far enough. And by the way, antibiotics, they're so essential. They're a very, very, very small share of healthcare spend in any country. And generic antibiotics, which are 95% probably of antibiotics used, literally it's 0.00 something% of healthcare spends that go into generic antibiotics. It's not a large proportion of spend, but the risk, if you don't have it available, is huge. And I think the question is, can we do something there?
I might turn this to Wolfgang, because HERA obviously has, as part of its HERA Invest, has a lot of also programs to kind of stimulate funding, and antibiotics, I understand, is one of the areas where they understand that there is a bit of struggle also in the pipeline. What do you think, what are some of maybe initiatives that HERA is working on that you can tell us about? And yeah, what else is missing here to kind of bring some funding and support for at the very start, at the very beginning of the process?
That's a good point. I mean, you all remember the Critical Medicines Alliance. That was the first step, basically, to activate the discussion with hundreds of stakeholders. It came up with a long list of recommendations of what needs to be done. At the end of the day, it comes to somebody, whoever that is or whatever that is, to invest into production lines. And when it comes to essential medicines and antibiotics, at least first line and last line are essential medicines. That needs to be taken care of. No? So there is no particular program where we would say we have now, I don't know, 500 million to set up production plants somewhere with the member state, but it's something that needs to be kept at the political level discussion across Europe to come up with tangible solutions. Perhaps the Critical Medicines Act, at the end of the day, the implementation of the measures should resolve some of the problems. We have to see that. What we are doing at HERA, I mean, we are investing quite a lot into the AMR problem, but very much of that goes into, let's say, early stage development. No? So not just of antibiotics, but also of alternative treatments, immunomodulators, phages, whatever, you name it. There's a couple of projects and programs going on because it is not just the need to have production lines, to have a certain level of independence or autonomy in Europe for essential medicines, but it's also a matter of keeping the innovation pipeline feeded. And that is our main focus at the moment when it comes to antibiotics. So that all goes hand in hand. But at the end of the day, we have to see what is and how far Europe is further, let's say, activating funds for also production, manufacturing, redundant manufacturing capacities for essential medicines. And yeah, stop here.
Yeah, okay. I think, maybe, yeah, a couple of people.
If I can just react to that, I think it's very important. And by the way, I'm not saying it's either early research or sort of essential supply of existing antibiotics. I think it's an and. I think at this point, again, the good news is we still have a functioning infrastructure with the manufacturing plant that we have in Austria. So I think that's a good news of it. I think the first step we need to make sure is that we can safeguard it, that we can make sure it is sustainable so that we can continue to operate it. And to be very clear, being the last remaining manufacturer of this type of product also creates a responsibility. And we realize and we take that extremely seriously. At the same time, please realize you also have a business to run. We need to make sure it's done in a way that is sustainable. We're not talking about building a huge amount of redundancy. It is at this point making sure that we still have the capacity. At the moment, we still have the capacity to supply Europe if needed. And I want to make sure we can continue to maintain that capacity.
I think Ola, you also wanted
yes,
to.
because from the medical society, we are very concerned about the lack of diversification of supply sources and supply chain when it comes to medication and also for medical devices. And from our point of view, we think that this is also a question about political courage to actually to create the right combination of regulation and funding to assure the population of Europe access to medicines and to medical devices, both in peacetime and in crisis.
Do you think there is a lack of political courage, or
well, yes, because as we hear, actually, what we are doing now do not actually foresee a solution to this, especially not in crisis situations. So there has to be taken political action at a more important and higher level than we see today. And I think hearing different political leaders across Europe, they should start to agree first to find the solutions, because they speak up, but they speak up not in the same way, all of them. So we need an agreement at European level first, to see what is the crisis, what is the problem, what are the challenges, and then find the solutions for the population of Europe.
I mean, to give you a concrete example, a pack of antibiotics costs less than a pack of chewing gum. That tells you how much European production of antibiotics is currently being valued. Not politically, not in the public eye, but just systematically.
Birgit, I wanted to bring you into this now. So when we're talking about everything that we're hearing here about the challenges in the production and ensuring that there is really a focus on having critical medicines that are ready for being deployed, how do you feel the situation is in Estonia, for example? Is this a problem that really comes up? Do you see it being discussed? Do you feel the European solidarity? I guess it's a smaller country.
It wasn't very solidar when it was a COVID time and the first vaccines were distributed. So they got, the trucks first stopped on a border and not allowed to access the Baltic states. So there is still some way in a solidarity to go. And I think those mechanisms that we are facing at the moment, that we will have a EU sort of like a procurement set or slot of vaccines or medicines, I think it's a very good guarantee for the smaller nations as well. Because in the COVID time, the smaller nations really did struggle because you had to buy out. There wasn't any immediate reaction on a supply side. But I think what we have now under the joint procurement, that we guarantee the production when there is need, immediate need, this is a very good solution. And I think it's great that it has come quite fast. But I think what is very important is that we at the moment focus on a competition on a global level, that Europe has to do something, but there's still quite a lot of competition within the EU. So I think the utmost important thing is to guarantee that the supply supply side for ingredients is also secured, because very recently we saw the distortion on a production, for example, in physiological infusions, because the salt used in infusions produced in Europe was actually dependent on a supply chain from South America, and there were storms and the boats didn't move. So very small things, force of nature, force majeure, can actually distort quite a lot. And those are the things we have to focus, not only the medicines, but also the medical supplies, medical equipment, oxygen production, antidotes, for example. The list is long, but I think we are getting there. So HERA is focusing on to guarantee that everything what is needed from the population side is marked there, but on a state side, we also have to make sure that the need of the hospitals or the healthcare providers is also there. And not to mention the hot topic now, to look on a stockpiling together with defense forces. So it's not that civilian side will stockpile, but it also has to support the defense side.
Yes, I think Wolfgang, do you want
Yeah,
to
I mean,
respond to that?
I just wanted to basically to summarize a little bit. I mean, what we are having at our hands, that's joint procurement. That's what we're doing for products which are not just, let's say, emergency products. So that is happening, and that has also an effect. Then we tried, for example, for certain antibiotics, last-line antibiotics, to increase the access across the EU. That did not work out perfectly well, but I mean, we're looking into the factors there. And then stockpiling. There are stockpiles established already of value of 1.2 billion. They are accessible at the end of the day in case of needs. But I mean, these are strategic stockpiles, no? So that is not like the EU will not become a warehouse. That's very clear. But I mean, for strategic items, difficult to produce, not sitting on a shelf, small quantities, etc., that's the right way to use it. And so following the new MCM or medical countermeasure strategy that was published by the Commission, I mean, that is something we're going to pursue in line with the stockpiling strategy, and that counts not just for finished products, but also for products under development. And Commissioner mentioned, for example, these vaccines, Marburg and Ebola vaccines, which are not finally approved, and also for APIs, so for active ingredients, pharmaceutical ingredients. Sorry.
Yeah.
So that's all happening. Yeah.
Yeah, these two tools particularly, I mean, so talking about stockpiling and joint procurement, we've heard that already a few times today that they are quite interesting, but also a bit sensitive when it comes to member states, particularly stockpiling. Earlier, the commissioner was also talking about how it can create sometimes between member states a bit of reticence and hesitancy and maybe sharing their stockpiling or really coming on board with joint procurement. Maybe Birgit, staying with you a bit, well, you know, it sounds like obviously this is something that you will support, but how do we kind of overcome, maybe, and the commissioner was saying, build this trust so that Europe is working together and understanding that it's a collaborative effort to prepare for health crisis?
At the moment, there is quite a big discussion. What is the sort of like a limit for national stockpiling? Because if you are wealthy, you can stockpile for 6 months, 8 months, 10 months. And what does it affect? It affects the distortions of the medicines in the internal market. So I think the agreement that not more than 4 months or 3 months will allow smaller nations also to catch up, because if we let it free, we will have the same situation. Right. So I think it's those discussions that you have to show some solidarity, you have to let others to catch up, that every country will have its minimum necessity covered. I think this is very important, but I think it's going in that way. So, and also you have to know your neighbors. And you have to know your geographical situation, where the aid or where the help is coming from. It's good that, for example, France has an enormous amount of stockpiles. For them to get to Estonia, if their air is closed, air traffic is closed, 0. I mean, we depend on Scandinavian countries, we depend on Baltic countries, we depend on Poland. And that's what we know. So we build, so to say, the systems and stockpiling solutions together.
To be very blunt, I think national stockpile or stockpiling requirements are a classical case of the road to hell being paved with good intentions. I really think it's counterproductive. The reason for that is, firstly, you're absolutely right. A large country then will put in a measure to require stockpiling, which can lead to a shortage in a smaller country. And we saw that in the last few years. That happened several times, that a stockpiling requirement in a large country led to a shortage in a small country. Plus, if you have that stockpile in one country and that country releases it, even from a regulatory point of view, very often we're not allowed to ship that packaged product to another country because it doesn't have the right national label. I would argue, first of all, if you want to have strategic stockpile, do it at European level and do it at bulk. Because then you have the products available and you can ship them to the countries where they are needed. But don't forget, I mean, during COVID, we sometimes found it harder to ship products between EU nations than from India to Europe. I still also think that you were talking about European solidarity. I think we still have a lot to learn here. And I would argue national stockpiling is trying to solve a problem at the wrong level. And it leads to unintended consequences, which is a shortage somewhere else.
I think everybody wants to react. Maybe Ole, Jan first, and then
Yes, but to some extent I agree with you, but it is not very difficult to imagine that several crises that we may face in the future may also disrupt our communications within Europe. And what do we do then? Of course, we have, well, we are a continent with different opportunities, but I think that to some extent we need also stockpiling at national level, because if communications are disrupted, there will be countries with a very big problem.
Yeah, I would just say that in general, I can agree, but minimum has to be there. For example, as you as a citizen or you as a patient, if you are prepared, you will for sure have some prescribed medicine for yourself at home and for your relatives. That is about the preparedness. And also, it's the same for the citizens and for the healthcare providers. So we have said up to 30 days. It's important to have it on spot because we also saw the situation in Ukraine when the civilian 30 days can be consumed in one day. And we know then that actually no help can reach us in first 3 days or first 7 days. So some of the stockpiles have to be there and have to be within the hospital or the healthcare institutions, so that's crucial. Yeah, but not over stockpiling. So I agree.
And look, I think there I'm totally with you. I think at the end of the day, then, if you have a crisis, again, some crises take longer, right? So are you able to produce? Because no matter what stockpile you have, whether you run out after 30 days, you run out after 6 months, not disagreeing with you. You need to have a certain flexibility in your supply chain, and also we need to have that as a company. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the question, do we have the industrial infrastructure that allows us to be autonomous as a European Union? And that, for me, is a question where I'm saying, at this point, in some areas, yes, in some, no, but we are at risk of losing it. So at this point, I don't think we're talking about expanding our autonomy. I'm talking about safeguarding what we have.
Okay.
I would simply add to that not just the industrial capacities, but also the supply chains.
Yes.
No, because I mean, in particular on antibiotics, we have a long report on 1,700 compounds showing that this is not in place. No, that's very clear. Sure. We know that. But when it comes to stockpile, strategic stockpile, I would fully agree, makes sense. Bulk stockpiling makes sense. Smart stockpiling makes even more sense. And that requires specialists to look into these things, but also that countries sit together and open a little bit their books to see what is really needed, you know. So how do you define a strategic stockpile for a product, you know? And that must not be hundreds of products, but the most essential parts. So, I mean, we are funding now another project, we call this joint action. It's between member states on stockpiling. That's kind of implementation part of the stockpiling strategy, you know? So that countries sitting together, they're coming up with ideas on how to set these things up and how to manage these things as well, because the management is highly complex and it needs to be done by specialists and specialized companies at the end of the day. You know? So we're not there, but I mean, I think the discussion is, the discussion level is there so that everybody understands this is now necessary to be implemented, you know? Because otherwise it just stays a concept and that makes no sense. Yeah.
That's true.
Well, as far as I understand, what actually you're telling us about is how can we be prepared for the next crisis? And we see that, well, we do try to prepare at several levels, but I would just like to highlight, and I don't know if it's just to take Hera as a representative of the Commission here, but you're the one. And I really think it's important that the Commission actually takes the responsibility of developing safe staffing level guidelines for healthcare professionals as a benchmark for health threat preparedness. Because if we could have such guidelines, we would be more equally and better prepared in member states for actually having the necessary healthcare staffing level that we need to level up when the crisis comes.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, I think WHO would not be happy if you would do that. But who knows? No? But at the end of the day, obviously, what we have seen during the pandemic as well is helping out across borders works, also with healthcare professionals. I mean, that happened for a very long time, and that brings me back to this solidarity point. But obviously, one thing is clear. If you have good preparedness plans, staffing, and activate or staff that you can activate along certain scenarios, that's part of basic preparedness. You know, so that's something that needs to be done. And here again, we would need to see where countries should need to see where they are exactly with that. No, because then at the end of the day, if you can come up with pre-arrangements on helping out in certain scenarios, cross borders, cross regions, whatever, that is certainly an element that needs to be fixed or can be fixed at EU level.
And if on top of that we train them, it would be good.
Yeah, sure. Untrained staff is not really useful if you want, if you need to have a qualified response.
The reason why I mentioned that is because we often see that some healthcare professionals, like doctors, are left out when trainings are done. And we have to finance training and to bring everybody on board, whatever are their conditions or their contract with public health, because we need them all, and we need to train them all before the crisis arrives.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, surge capacities, that's the keyword everywhere. It costs money. It has long lead times because you need to train the people, you need to have the university capacities, etc., etc. No?
But it's even more expensive if the crisis arrives and you have untrained personnel to cover it.
Sure. I mean, that is... Sure. Okay.
that is actually one of the solutions what we do, because what we can do is to train the healthcare staff, and we have invested, I think, per capita quite a lot into the training, because if you want to teach a new doctor, it takes at least 10+ years. Nurses, relatively less, but our strategy is to upscale and widen the competencies of the doctors. So now we train quite extensively each year trauma casualties, so specific skills, and also to the general practitioners that they are ready in times when it's needed. We train them new skills, how to treat the patient, and also we did a sort of like a mapping of the resources, meaning that those healthcare professionals who are not active at the moment, we know where they are. We have the system how to make a call, and then involve them within the institutions. And also there's a quite big debate on giving more rights to nurses, actually, because again, that's the reality. That's what is happening. So it's debatable at the moment, but this is one of the options. But yes, indeed, upscaling.
Very good. Sorry, first I wanted to follow up quickly on this. This is very interesting. Can you share more about how you can help train the workforce, particularly when, how we said, we're expecting multiple threats and you don't know when they're coming or which one is coming. Maybe there are some lessons learned here for other countries?
Every healthcare institution in Estonia has to have a crisis plan. It's quite detailed. It has 13 different layers, and you have to map your staff, and you have to map the competencies of your staff. without the crisis, in normal times, even, and it has been forever that you have to train your teachers or doctors and healthcare staff at least 160 hours within 4 years. So it's quite a lot. It pushes the providers to invest into training, and this is obligatory. So now, on top of that, we, as a state, finance sort of concrete courses. Those who work in a hospital area or in a nursing area, they know that hospital mass casualties scenario, nurses casualty scenario, things like that. And what we want to do is we train the trainers among the healthcare staff as well. So before, a couple of years ago, all the trainers were coming from US, UK, depends, South Africa. But now we have our own. We have managed to train our own. And this will give us the continuity, the spread of knowledge. So I would say that we are able to face any type of crisis. You mentioned different scenarios. True. You can have mass poisoning. That's one scenario. You have to have equipment, you have to have the knowledge, how to recognize it, you have to have antidotes, medicines, skills, how to treat it. Then we can have mass trauma incidents. Then we can have pandemics. We can't say it won't happen again. And then we can have, for example, one of the weakest points all over Europe is burn incidents and burn treatment. We are relatively all very weak in that. So we have to calculate in that in the future there won't be one crisis, but probably 3 or 4 or 5 at the same time. And it actually gives a very, very big challenge for the healthcare workers, how to provide what is needed.
I think we're nearing the end of our time, so I want to make sure everybody gets kind of like a last word in. First off, did anybody want to react earlier? I saw some flags, but yeah.
Well, having worked with public health at community level in Norway, another small country in Europe for more than 30 years, I'm very happy to hear what you actually have achieved as a small country relatively with certainly less resources than Norway. So we certainly can learn from you. But I would just like to highlight one more point, is the multidisciplinary aspect of training when it comes to crisis preparedness. That is very important because the doctors will not be those who own the crisis. They will not be those who are the leadership in a crisis. They have to actually train to work in a multidisciplinary aspect with other professionals and with another leadership. And I think that is very, very important if you want to actually take out the potential of, as you say, GPs, for example, in a local crisis.
Thank you. Okay, then maybe I'll do a final round. Wolfgang, kind of like if you have any, first off, like any closing kind of words that you'd like to say, but otherwise my last question was going to be on funding, which some of it we already touched upon, on where we think we need to invest the most in health preparedness right now, where the biggest gaps is. So yeah, what's your take? How do you think we can ensure that there is sustained funding, particularly at a time where I think there's a lot of concern that health is being a bit overlooked, but perhaps health preparedness is one area because of the intersection also with defense and civil cooperation where this might actually be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, funding is, or budget is the basis of it all. No? So at EU level, I mean, the MFF proposal is there. When it comes to health security funding, there is different arms where different instruments that might be able to be used for future funding. But at the end of the day, to sum this a little bit up, and I mean, I just wanted to say, I mean, in terms of solidarity, there was a lot of solidarity in Europe in the first year and the second year as well. When it came to therapeutics, we made sure that all countries had access to it. Same for diagnosis, so everything that was basically brought through joint procurement, and then in particular the vaccines. I mean, it was even made sure that every country receives vaccines at the very same day, the 27th of December in 2020. No, so I mean, and then afterwards, always there was a lot of solidarity, not just within Europe, but also with countries outside of Europe. We were the biggest provider of vaccines, etc., etc. So I think that's in our DNA, and that will continue to stay. But what we have to do is we need to continue to build. That comes with funding, with budgets, but also with structures, but also with procedures and decision making. That is the most important point here. And we need to store certain things. We need to share certain things, and need to have the procedures and the processes in place for that. But we should not rely just on hope, on waiting, and on importing. That's what I would say.
Very good. Maybe, yeah, any, I guess, yeah, a call for policymakers in the EU and on what Estonia needs.
Yes, we have always stressing the need to be prepared. We stress the types of crises or the scenarios that might hit us. There's a big list of possible contagious diseases coming from here and there. There's a war going on. There is a climate warming. And all those messages in a context of preparing, sometimes that those messages are making you feel very vulnerable, hopeless, feeling to give up. But I think we, as a leaders, also you, as a citizens, I think it's utmost important to turn it around and to make it our strength and keep up the hope, because I always like to quote what our previous General of the Defense Forces said, that each and every citizen should keep in mind that the defense forces will win the battle, but the states with their citizens, they will win the war. So it's about the mindset, it's about willingness, and it's about the hope. So we have to keep it up, even though the topics are hard.
Thank you. Simon?
Look, strategic autonomy in Europe and crisis preparedness requires a reliable and stable supply of essential medicines. If you want to have a reliable and stable supply of essential medicines, you need to have the capacity and capability to manufacture them in Europe. And if you want to maintain that, we need to have the willingness to give a certain preference to medicines that are manufactured in Europe. We're not talking about the expensive medicines. We're talking about actually some of the cheapest medicines. So it's not a hugely expensive task, but it's one that we have to be willing to entertain. And if we do that, then we can be strategically autonomous and we can be very well prepared for any crisis. We need to have the will to do so.
Thank you. Ola, Johan?
Well, thank you. Well, my expectation from the political level, I think I've expressed already, but I think it's just important to also remind ourselves about the need for a better integration for the One Health approach into the strategy for a better coordinated response, included, as you mentioned, environmental factors. I think that is something that we should keep in mind for the preparedness for Europe from the next crisis as well.
Okay, thank you so much all. That's all the time that we have, but thank you. Okay.